Welcome to my world history notes, where I read from the book I wrote to teach homeschoolers world history. A Bible believer looks at world history. So you're not going to agree with my conclusions. My conclusions might even, excuse me, might even be offensive to you, but they are from the perspective of a Bible believer, not a fundamentalist, not a Catholic, not a Muslim, not an atheist, not a Hindu, a Bible believer. So now, my goal is that you will take these things that um, I tell you about, and that you will study them and investigate them and come to your own conclusions from your study of world history. And I hope that if you want to purchase my book, you can get it on lulu.com, amazon.com, the Bible Baptist Bookstore, or just follow me here. So we're going to talk a little bit about culture before World War II. Then the next time we'll get into some geopolitics to set the stage for the explosion that comes. So in the world of entertainment, in this time, the silent movie ran its course until 1927, and then one of the first, if not the first, talkie, The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson, hit the big screen. Some favorites of silent movie fans were the D.W. Griffith World War I era blockbusters about the Civil War, The Birth of a Nation, and Intolerance. International hits include the 1927 French epic Napoleon. With talkies came the inevitable celebrity self pat on the back, and the Academy Awards began in 1929 with the swashbuckling silent film hero and president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Douglas Fairbanks, presiding. The first movie to win an Academy Award was Wings, about World War I fighter pilots. Other notable movies of the 1930s, as the golden age of Hollywood, quote unquote, began, were westerns like John Wayne's intro to the screen, Stagecoach, adventures like Tarzan the Ape Man with the Olympic swim hero Johnny Weissmuller, and Captains Courageous. During this era, the Hollywood Babylon began to emerge in full swing with wild stories of violence, drunken orgies, rape, and murder, tantalizing a public that was growing increasingly immune to shame caused by sin. Music in the 1920s was dominated by the excess of the time, which was called by some the Roaring Twenties. With Prohibition in America, alcoholic drinks were provided by bootleggers and rum runners who smuggled the swill into the well off the poor folks made bathtub gin. Um, smuggled the swill into the well off, while the poorer folks made bathtub gin. So the bootleggers really catered to the wealthier or more people with more money, and people made their own alcohol. Young, trendy women were called flappers. If they were hotsy totsy, they were the bee's knees or the cat's pajamas. That's some slang from the time. If you had to leave quickly because the coppers were onto your shenanigans, you left 23 skidoo. Louis Armstrong was popular playing his trumpet as popular music began to be called by vulgar, sexually oriented names given to different forms by the ethnic groups that created them. Ragtime became jazz music, where musician played a gig, and boogie woogie was popularized in the late 1930s. These are all have to do with sex, or slang terms having to do with sex. Jazz was a very popular in the nightclubs of Europe during the 1920s and 1930s. Black rhythms began to dominate popular music, and the adoption of various, excuse me, various styles by musicians in general and musicians in general lent to flesh-based music respectability. Now, music has degenerated from the Baroque, where the spirit's delight in God was exalted, to the classical, where the soul's need for expression was honored, to the fleshy, carnal musical forms, straight, just totally designed to get you moving, and eventually rock and roll, another music form with a vulgar slang phrase for a title that would conquer the world. All music now is definitely based on the flesh, based on sexual inclinations and orientations, and it's based on the flesh. The beat, the rhythm, and the consequences of such music, um, it just it's if a modern singer throws in God or Jesus once in a while, they'll say, well, it's Christian rock, but it's still, you can see the progression or regression of music, what its purpose and what the intention of what's supposed to inspire is. If you just look at it, just think about it. Sports was dominated by heroes in baseball, which was considered the national pastime, with heroes like Babe Ruth and the doomed Lou Gehrig taking the stage. Boxing had its giants like Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, and the young Joe Louis. The Olympics were popular in the giant of Christian lore. Eric Liddell, the Flying Scotsman, hero of the movie Chariots of Fire, won the men's 400-meter sprint in 1924 before going on to martyrdom as a missionary in China, suffering from a brain tumor and malnutrition in a Japanese prison camp. The American Football Association, Professional Football Association, formed with 11 teams in 1920. Soccer's World Cup Championship began in 1930. The Stanley Cup became the supreme trophy of the National Hockey League in 1926, after having been in use since 1892 as an award for Canada's top amateur hockey team. Golf saw one of its greatest, Bobby Jones, competing during this time period, and in racing, Daytona Beach became the place to set world speed records in the 20s and 30s. 1926 saw the beginning of professional tennis in Europe. In science, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley excavated ancient Ur in 1922 and deduced a great deal about Sumeria. He unfortunately drew false conclusions about the relationship between the flood of Noah and evidence of a flood. He found underground layers in that area. Edwin Hubble, the astronomer, worked during this era and is credited with discovering that the Andromeda Nebula was a different galaxy than our Milky Way. In 1924, two U.S. Army biplanes flew around the world. Clarence Birdseye and Charles Seabrook developed a process for freezing cooked foods in 1925 and patented in 1926. It gave birth to our frozen dinners. In 1926, Richard Byrd will fly over the North Pole for the first time. Robert Goddard launches the world's first liquid fuel rocket in 1926. And in 1927, Charles Lindbergh will become the #1 American hero by flying to France in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, in the first nonstop solo transatlantic flight, which Aviatrix, that's a female aviator, Amelia Earhart does in 1928. In 1929, James Doolittle of future war fame will fly solely on instruments for the first time, taking off and landing. The world's longest suspension bridge, the George Washington Bridge, opens in 1931 between New York and New Jersey. The iron lung is invented in 1931. The cardiac pacemaker is invented in 1932. In 1928, anthropologist Margaret Mead published her landmark and flawed Coming of Age in Samoa. So these are some cultural things that took place. Lots of stuff going on between the wars. We're going to talk briefly about geopolitics before we get into the era of World War II. So we'll do that next time. And I thank you for listening. Like I say, you're not going to agree with what I say because I'm doing it from the perspective of someone who believes the Bible, literally. I can see I'm seeing the degression of music. I'm seeing it going down, as I said. And this is not racism. This is not against any ethnic group. But the fact is, music is the music, especially our music, has gone from a height to a depth. And we need to understand that. We understand how our culture is deteriorating and has been for many, many decades. It's a process and it just gets worse with every war. So anyway, stop there and we'll continue next time. Thank you.